This is our online lecture on instrument and data collection. Objectives for the lecture are the following. So for this lecture, we must remember the two categories of data, primary or secondary, different sources of data, and what are the three types of variations in data collection. So what are the instruments? These are tools that researchers use to collect data for research studies. These are alternatively called tests. So remember, when selecting your instrument, remember our concept of validity and reliability. It must have the highest validity and highest reliability and have the greatest ease of administration, scoring, and interpretation. Two issues in using instruments. Validity is the degree to which the instrument measures what it is supposed to measure, and reliability is the degree to which the instrument consistently measures what it purports to measure. So remember, precision is free of random error, while accuracy is free of systematic error. So remember our bullseye target. Systematic error would have high precision but low accuracy. Or random error, there is low precision and low accuracy. This may result to bias or random variation. And of course, there are possible confounding variables that may produce certain errors. So random errors arise from sampling variability or chance. They may inflate or deflate through measurements. And these are the factors that contribute to random errors: poor precision, sampling error, and errors in measurement. How to reduce random errors? We could increase sample size. This may increase precision or reliability of measurements. Compute for our sampling error. These are values obtained from a sample, differ from those in the total population. Use statistical tests to evaluate the role of chance. And ensure consistency of measurements by standardization and training of bias or systematic errors could arise from selection bias and selection bias is any error that arises in the process of identifying the study population. It occurs when subjects have different probabilities of being included in the study sample based on either exposure or the outcome. So there are types of selection bias. First is prevalence incidence bias. It's the selection of the study population is influenced by the selective survival of prevalent cases. Bergsonian bias or admission rate bias, subjects taken from hospitals are already a select group of subjects. Non-participation bias, these are subjects who refuse to participate, are likely to be different from those who give consent. Health worker bias, the reason is that workers as a whole tend to be healthier than the general population. Migration or dropout bias occurs when some members in the study group drop out over time. Thus, the characteristics of the remaining subjects differ from those in the original. Volunteer bias is due to the fact that those individuals who take part in epidemiologic studies tend to be systematically different from those who do not. Wrong sample size bias is the inability to detect differences arising from inadequacy of methods of controlling selection bias. We could restrict or narrow the range of characteristics of subjects, randomize, allow subjects' characteristics to equalize, matching, equalize the distribution of extreme, stratify, compare rates within subgroups, and have multivariate adjustment. Simultaneous effects of variables are observed in order to determine the independent effect. Information bias is the bias that results from errors committed during measurement of exposure or factors of outcomes, leading to misclassification of subjects in one or more variables. This results to a distortion of the estimate of effect, which would lead to wrong strength of association. Types of information bias are the following. Interviewer bias, a systematic difference in soliciting, recording, interpreting of information from subjects. Abstractor bias, probing more thoroughly among known cases compared to the controls. Recall bias, cases are more likely to recall events related to illness than controls. Prevarication bias, false responses from. So how could we reduce information bias? We could blind both the interviewer and participants, standardize training of observers, standardize data collection tools, adequately formulate pre-tested questionnaires, use of memory aids, charts, or figures. Confounding is a distortion of the estimate of effect in analytic studies due to the influence of an extraneous factor. The crude and adjusted measures of effects are not equal. What are the characteristics of a confounder? It is not the independent nor the dependent variable under study. This extraneous variable is also a risk factor for a disease outcome. It's not an intermediate step in the causal path between exposure and disease. It is associated with both dependent and independent variables. So for example, what is the effect of the confounder on the association between air pollution and bronchitis? We could say that air pollution brings about bronchitis. But overcrowding as a confounder affects both air pollution and bronchitis. So what would the effect of confounders be? It may distort the true value or degree of association of variables. It may generate a positive association when there is in fact no association or vice versa. Positive or negative confounding over or underestimation of the strength of association. The strength of association may either be reduced or increased. So is being a male a risk factor for malaria? So, male gender, malaria. A confounder will be an outdoor occupation which generally goes to the males. Hence, if you look at assessing confounders, males are more predisposed to have malaria over females. And assessing this for indoor occupation and outdoor occupation, males would have a higher chance for malaria. Is there confounding? Crude, stratified occupation. So changes in the value indicate distortion due to confounder. Methods to control confounding. We randomize, we restrict, we match, we do stratified analysis, and do multivariate analysis as well. So 1 to 3 are preventive strategies and are done in the planning stage. Errors compromise the validity of research. So simply internal validity means that there is a cause-effect relationship between the variables and the outcome is not caused by confounding or intervening variables. Events outside of the study experiment or between repeated measures of the dependent variable may affect participants' responses to the experiment procedures. Often, these are large-scale events, natural disaster, political change, that affect the participants' attitudes and behavior such that it becomes impossible to determine whether any change on the dependent measures is due to the independent variable or the historical event. Maturation. Subjects change during the course of the experiment or even between measurements. For example, young children might mature and their ability to concentrate may change as they grow up. Both permanent changes such as physical growth and temporary ones like fatigue provide natural alternating explanations. Thus, they may change the way a subject would react to the independent variable. So, upon completion of the study, the researcher may not be able to determine if the cause of the discrepancy is due to time or the independent variable. Instrumentation. The instrument used during the testing process can change the experiment. This also refers to observers being more concentrated or primed. If any instrumentation changes occur, the internal validity of the main conclusion is affected, as alternative explanations are readily available. Experimenter bias. Experimenter bias occurs when the individuals who are conducting an experiment inadvertently affect the outcome by non-consciously behaving differently to members of control and experiment groups. It is possible to eliminate the possibility of experimenter bias through the use of double-blind study designs in which the experimenter is not aware of the condition to which a participant belongs. Contamination. This occurs when there is communication about the experiment between groups of participants. Regression. Regression threat can occur when subjects have been selected on the basis of extreme scores because extreme low and high scores in a distribution tend to move closer to the mean in repeated testing. For example, if a group of subjects was recruited on the basis of extremely high scores and educational intervention was conducted, any post-intervention improvement noted could be due partly, if not entirely, to regression rather than to the coping techniques presented in the education program. External validity answers the questions, how well can we generalize the results to other populations? The ability of the study to generalize beyond a set of observations to some universal statement. So there are also threats to react external validity. Pre-test treatment interaction. A pre-test might increase or decrease a subject's sensitivity or responsiveness to the experiment variable. Indeed, the effect of pre-test to subsequent tests has been empirically substantiated. Multiple treatment interference. As multiple treatments are given to the same subjects, it is difficult to control for the effects of prior treatments. Treatment diffusion. If treatment groups communicate or interact with each other, they may incorporate pieces of each other's treatment into their own. This would alter the initial status of the treatment's comparison. Experimenter effects. The actions of the researcher, whether conscious or unconscious, may affect the participants' performance and response. Reactive effects. Participants may act differently when they know they are involved in a study. This is also referred to as the John Henry effect of the Hawthorne effect. Data collection. Records review, observation, data extraction, interview, self are just some of the forms that we could collect data. Survey techniques. It could be self-administered, either mailed, drop or pick up, group administered, telephone call, or internet surveys. Interviews would either be telephone, personal, or group discussions. Observation, we should remember always the possibility of hot. So use of an existing instrument or develop your own. So you ask, are there previous related research where you could get the data collection? When using previous research, always get permission from the author that you are going to use the data collection tool that they have developed. Was the instrument validated? Construct the content validation. Will there be any language, cultural, sociological differences from the original design of the instrument and to your own subject population? Will your subjects easily understand the directions? Is the scoring system the same or as what is prescribed by your statistical design? Or you could develop your own. Again, it must be reliable, valid, usable, appropriate, clear, and easy to score. So before designing a data collection tool, you must have a clear answer to the following questions. What is it you are trying to show with your study? What is the hypothesis? What are your objectives? What date will you need to form? And it's a balancing act because collecting data is time consuming. So you have to be careful in collecting only what you need. Going back to collect more data later is not always feasible. So collect all the data that you need. So how do you simplify and specify data collection? So it's important that you use a tool that circles or check boxes only. So it forces conformity on data recorders. It includes all possible selections that may be of interest. Always include others or others specified. And indicate how many choices should be selected. Is it all, most permanent, or be structured. Open-ended questions, so respondent is asked to provide his or her own answer to the question, or it could be a closed-ended question which is respondent is asked to select an answer from among a list provided by the bias refers to any property of questions that encourages respondents to answer in a So bias or loaded questions, these are ring-through statements, hard to disagree with statements, and leading questions. Information sought are usually demographic. What are the characteristics of the subject? Knowledge, what people know. Attitudes and belief, what people think about an issue. Behavior and practice, what people do. Advantage of open-ended questions. Variety is needed so you don't know the answers. Answers are not influenced by researchers. Cons, it's hard to tabulate and interpret and affected by individual writing ability and less easy to complete. So there is no preformed answers usually result in short answers from respondents. Close-ended, respondent chooses from answers provided. Answers are fixed such as their specific response given, so it's either a yes or a no. Be sure that there is no overlap in categories and the list is exhaustive. Likert, construct numerical categories, response anchors with equal range. Semantics, use bipolar adjectives as anchors to measure attitude. And ranking gets a sense of relative meaning toward items. Partially close-ended supply some responses but leave to an avenue to write responses on their own. So example, open-ended. What type of family planning method do you use? For close-ended fixed alternatives, what type of family planning methods do you use? And then you provide a checklist. Examples. What is your assessment of the HPV seminar? The topics are useful and you rate at 1 to 5. The venue is conducive for learning and again you rate 1 to 5. Close-ended, semantic, differential. What is your impression of pole dancing as a way of losing weight? Bad. On the other end, good. Effective, not effective. Masculine, feminine, unattractive, and unattractive. And then you. Close-ended ranking examples. Which is the most effective way of ensuring sanitation to prevent spread of infection? Rank the following items 1 to 5, with 1 being the best. Partially close-ended. What are the main issues you are currently facing in your life? Please check all that apply and then provide others. Please specify. This is a visual scale. How will you rate the pain? From 0 to 10, 0 from none, and 10 being. A survey format checklist would include introduction, where it includes the purpose of your survey, any ethical approval, and how your results will be used. Set instructions. Be aware that a few people will read it without good prompting and being easy to read. Group like questions together. Consider other effects, habituation, fatigue, switching between. Make sure your font type is readable. size, number of pages, margins, either double or single spaced, demographics, usually a single section, usually at the beginning or at the end of the questionnaire. Only use relevant questions. Leave space for comments and end the questionnaire saying, wording advice. Use one idea per question. Make your statements clear, brief, and simple. Avoid leading questions. Avoid estimates if possible. Use words that are familiar to the respondent. Avoid fancy words and jargon. Be clear about meanings of words. Avoid negative questions. And do a pilot study. State alternatives precisely and mutually exclusive responses. Use stages if needed, but give. What's wrong with these questions? You will see that these questions would either contain two different ideas, would have loaded and leading question. Hard to say no because it will mean the subject has poor character development. And how much is somewhat and how much is greatly? Again, this presents with statements that have two ideas, would either have a double negative or too many alternatives in one question. In double meaning, you do not know what the intention of the author is. Is it that people should be afraid of HIV because it is communicable and fatal? Or is that people should not be afraid of HIV if they are practicing safe sex and other precautionary measures? Was it all the time or just when having sex with people other than your wife or husband? Time element is missing. So what's wrong? What do you think about sexual relations between two adults of the same sex? Always wrong, almost always wrong, sometimes wrong, not. So you immediately conclude that it is wrong. Do you agree or disagree that smoking should be banned in public buildings? What is your religion? So specific packages are available that support the design of questionnaires. Many are available. Examples. So what are the acceptable data collection methods? In psychometrics, content validity, also known as logical validity, refers to the extent to which a measure represents all facets of a given social construct. Content validity is different from face validity, which refers not to what the test actually measures, but to what it superficially appears to measure. Face validity assesses whether the test looks valid to the examinees who took it, the administrative personnel who decides on its use, and other technically untrained observers. Content validity requires the use of recognized subject matter experts to evaluate whether items assess defined content and more. Regular statistical test then does the assessment of face validity. In psychometrics, criterion validity is a measure of how well one variable or set of variables predicts an outcome based on information from other variables. and will be achieved if a set of measures from a personality test relate to a behavioral criterion on which psychologists agree. A typical way to achieve this is to the extent to which a score on a personality test can predict future performance or behavior. Another way involves correlating test scores with another established test that also measures the same personality characteristic. Criterion or concrete validity is the extent to which the measures are demonstrably related to concrete criteria in the real world. This type of validity is often divided into concurrent and predictive subtype of validity. The term concurrent validity is reserved for demonstrations relating a measure to other concrete criteria assessed simultaneously. In standard for education and psychological tests, it states concurrent validity reflects only the status quo at particular time. Although concurrent and predictive validity is similar, it is cautioned to keep the terms and findings separate. Concurrent validity should not be used as a substitute for predictive validity without an appropriate supporting rationale. Predictive validity refers to the degree to which any measure can predict future or independent past events. These variables are often represented as intermediate and ultimate criteria. For example, let us say we are conducting a study on success in college. If we find out there is a high correlation between student grades in high school math classes and their success in college, which can be measured by many possible variables, we would say there is high criterion-related validity between the intermediate variable and the ultimate variable. Essentially, the grade students received in high school math can be used to predict their success in college. Based on the things we've discussed, what are the analysis we should do to validate a measure? What order do we do them? So consider the flow chart and why do we do each. So run a pilot survey. We first test the questionnaire on a small sample of our subjects first. The aim here is to detect any flaws in your questioning and correct this survey. Trouble signs in doing your pilot test. High don't know responses. High incomplete interviews. Too many ambiguous or qualified responses. Irrelevant responses. So we could have a case report form. This is a repository of all information or data that need to be collected from a subject in a research. This is apart from the questionnaire that is constructed or borrowed for the purpose of getting the desired information or data. Data from these forms are encoded with the use of data processing software. These are the examples. My lecture. If there are any questions, comment below. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel for further lectures on preventive medicine and community health. Stay safe. Thank you.